right? Thanking God for his intervention and the fact that, unlike the intervention we saw in the life of Saul, who would become the Apostle Paul, his interventions are not always to stop us as much as they are sometimes to help align things in a way that help us understand. And that seems to be exactly what is going on in the lives of Peter and Cornelius, two people who are going to seem to have seemingly coincidental interventions from God that are going to help them understand some things that they are going to need to accomplish together. First of all, though, taking the chapter in order, it is going to seem that in verses 1 through 8, Cornelius is going to have God guide him into who he should seek. That being who? Peter. What? He's supposed to seek him. And where? He's going to seek him where he's staying at the home of Simon the tanner. So he's going to have some very specific instructions as to who he's supposed to look for and etc. Why is that going to be important? Well, because by the time we get to verses 9 through 16, Peter is going to be told by God or guided by God as to who he should expect. And 3 times he's going to get this vision or dream that is going to help him to open up to those he might otherwise have rejected. Why is that important? Well, because by the time we get to verses 17 through 22, the folks who were sent from Cornelius to look for Peter are actually going to arrive, and the timing is going to seem to catch Peter's attention enough that with the vision, he's going to receive them and ask them essentially what they are looking for. And the next day in verses 23 through 29, he is going to agree to go with them, even though otherwise he's in the mentality that even though he is now a Christian, his heritage is such that as a Hebrew, they still stay relatively separate from the Gentiles. But God's intervention has helped him to move forward and beyond what he knew to what God is guiding him to, and that is to actually minister to this particular Gentile, Cornelius, and his family. And so in verses 23 through 29, Peter is going to conclude with the question to Cornelius, understanding that Peter would not have otherwise have been there. He is going to ask, why have you called for me? At which point, verses 30 through 33 are going to show Cornelius directly answering the question, why, helping Peter quite possibly better understand that Cornelius had his own vision with enough specificity that he was able to send his men to find Peter, leading Peter in verses 34 through 43 after hearing the detail with which Cornelius had the vision that allowed his men to find Peter, to realize that God shows no partiality, but as he's going to say, anyone who fears God and does what is right is acceptable to him, as he will then lead into an explanation, much of which he believes it seems that Cornelius may already understand, and that is a list of facts or things that he had witnessed from his time during the life of Christ, or his time with Christ during his life before his crucifixion, as he's going to go on to talk about, of course, what we would call his death, burial, and resurrection. And likewise, even if it's not literally called the Great Commission here, the commission that he has given Peter and the apostles to be his witnesses to the ends of the earth. At which point, before he is even finished speaking, verses 44 through 48 are going to conclude the chapter with the famous description of the way in which the Holy Spirit falls on Cornelius and the Gentiles while Peter is speaking, eventually provoking him, understanding the timing in which God has moved in this situation, to ask the question, can anyone withhold water for baptizing these people who have received the Holy Spirit, just as we have? Ending the chapter with what we would call, actually more specifically, as the theme says, a divine intervention, not just any intervention. Understanding that divine intervention is one of those Bible school terms. It talks about the way in which coincidences, when they happen one after another, after a while stop seeming quite so coincidental. And so when Cornelius is given an idea of who to look for around the same time, Peter is given an idea of who to expect right around the time they actually arrive. That sets off a series of coincidences that after a while begin to look a whole lot less coincidental and a whole lot more like divine intervention, which reminded me of the way in which this video itself is just delayed. And as usual, I get a little bit upset when I can't get them out in the timing that I expect. But in the delay, I had a chance to have a conversation with a brother who was experiencing something that coincidentally was a lot like something I heard someone describe about a week or two before, which coincidentally was a lot like something I heard someone describe about a week or so before, and then so on and so forth. There are about 4 people who are having the same experience from completely different perspectives in roughly the same environment, helping me to see that much like the repeated coincidences of Cornelius and Peter and the timing of it all, after a while, as we said, had the coincidences seeming less coincidental. Likewise, the struggles of one and the struggles of another and the struggles of another and the struggles of another from different perspectives, coincidentally all lining up in, as we mentioned before, a super similar, if not roughly the same geographical environment, started making those experiences seem a whole lot less coincidental. And much like things did not clear up significantly or significantly enough for Cornelius and Peter and Cornelius's family, etc., until they came together to have a better understanding of their common experience, that reminded me of those individuals I mentioned who, whether they knew it or not, were sharing a common struggle, or a struggle that was common to the environment that they were in. All reminding me of Elijah's struggle from the cave as he fled Jezebel after one of his great victories on Mount Carmel. He got to the point where his isolation led him to feel that he was the only one enduring that kind of persecution and that kind of struggle, when God was able to encourage him by expanding his vision, as we sometimes say, reframing the issue for him to realize that he was not alone, but God still had 7,000 who had not yet bowed the knee to Baal, the false idol of that day, helping Elijah to realize that even though he was the only one he saw, he was not the only one of God's people struggling to cope with what Israel had become. Which reminds me of a struggle that I am hearing more and more these days. I sound old, I guess, when I say these days, but more and more I hear people, God's people in particular, struggling to cope with what our collective environment has become. Reminding me of why we had gotten into the habit of saying, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. God, please strengthen your people who are truly trying to accomplish your will, not to feel so overwhelmed by the times or our environment that we give up on the reality that you can divinely intervene in our situations to bring us into the company of others who are genuinely trying to do your will, your way.